Good evening, everyone. Get you to take your seats. Isn't it wonderful to have such a big showing tonight? I'm really pleased to welcome you to the Northumberland Learning Connections sixth event in our Brain and Mind series. Okay, and my name is Dorothy Gale. I'm past chair of the program committee. Northumberland County, where we are located tonight, is in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples. This territory has been inhabited and cared for from the beginning by Indigenous peoples and is covered by the Williams Treaty. I also want to acknowledge the sponsors for tonight's event. They're Edmund and Sylvia Van Haverbeck Foundation. And Ed and Sylvia are here today in the front. And so if you have an opportunity, introduce yourselves and express your appreciation. Secondly, before I introduce our guest, I'd like to acknowledge Sally McNulty. She was a community program committee member who worked for 3 years and was assigned the file on dreams. And she tracked down Tony Zadra, and she worked really hard for 3 years and was a great person to work with. She's not with us tonight. She's in Ireland, but the next best thing, she appreciates the recognition, and I won't embarrass her. Our guest tonight is Tony Zadra. He's a self-described one or not. What's a one or not? So I looked to Mr. Google, and it's someone who studies lucid dreaming. So there's not just dreaming, there's various kinds of dreaming. And Tony will be telling us about the different kinds of dreaming tonight. We all dream, but working as a sleep scientist studying lucid dreams and sleep disorder has given Tony great insights. He holds a Master of Arts in Experimental Psychology and a PhD in Clinical Psychology, both from McGill University. So he stayed close to home for his academics, but his parents lived quite a way from Montreal. He is now a full professor at the Université de Montréal and a researcher at the Center for Advanced Research in Sleep Medicine. As a resident of Montreal West, Tony spent last weekend without power. So he had lots of time to dream. Tony has spoken internationally in the United States, in Europe, and in Japan. When we were driving over, he told me he speaks about 160 times a year, which is a lot of speaking. His research interests are in adult psychological assessment and the psychology of consciousness, which of course is related to dreaming, and the study of parasomnia. But we'll let him describe that further. He's written too many papers to report. He told me he hides away on a cottage on the St. Lawrence River 2 weeks a year and writes continuously with no family and no interruptions. So isn't that wonderful? He's written several books. When Brains Dream is up at the front, as well as a fiction book, Dream Keepers. They're both available here at the front, and Tony will be signing them after the event. Let's Talk Books will also order them for you if you don't get one tonight. Our production schedule tells me that Tony will present for about 50 minutes and then answer questions. As there's no formal coffee break, I'll invite you to slip out quietly, grab a cup of coffee and maybe a chocolate or two if you aren't overdosed from Easter, and return quietly to your seats. The washrooms are also at the north end of the hall, right there. So without further ado, Tony, the floor is yours.
So I'll let our friend adjust that. Thank you for the invitation and for this occasion to speak to you about dreams. And so what I will be discussing today is a few questions. We'll just examine a few reasons why we should care about dreams and study them, or at least have some people study them. We're going to speak about sleep and sleep stages, because we're going to see that how we view dreams and maybe understand them ties into different stages of sleep. We're going to explore maybe do dreams have a function, and if so, what have people thought the function of dreams may be, and what are the more recent ideas about function of dreams. I'll spend a bit of time talking about lucid dreaming because it's a very exciting and new venue to study the dreaming mind. And finally, if I have a bit of time, I'll talk about a new discipline in the field known as dream engineering. And I'll have, hopefully, plenty of times to answer any of your questions. So first of all, why should we study dreams? Well, I think that one reason is in this room. People are interested about dreams. People want to know why we dream. Do they have meaning? Where do they come from? Why don't we remember them and other people remember them a lot? Why do we have recurrent dreams or nightmares and things of that nature? So there's an intrinsic interest in dreams, but they're not new. The interest in why we dream and where dreams come from are as old as humankind itself. And actually, the oldest known story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is on clay tablets over 4,000 years old, is all centered around dreams, and dreams play a very key role in the different adventures that the king Gilgamesh has. We also know that dreams have played a major role in every major religion, how we view the universe and our place within it, how we view and think about death, and actually sleep and death have always been closely related in myths and in stories and even in philosophy, and also in the way that the sacred world can intersect with spiritual dimensions or the sacred and divine. So dreams have, not metaphorically, but in a very real sense, shaped the conception of how we view ourselves, the world around us, and the place within it. Now, other than these very lofty reasons to study dreams, it also allows us to have windows into what are the processes behind human imagination, because dreams are very creative products of the mind. What can we learn from studying dreams about creativity? How does the content of our dreams relate to our waking lives, the emotions we live, the stressors we undergo, our ongoing concerns? How does dreams maybe inform us about different forms of consciousness that the human mind and brain can find itself in? Can it inform us about the possible functions of sleep? And finally, the big questions, why and how do we dream? Now, before I start talking a little bit about the actual research related to dreams, I just want to take a step back and to say, when you think about the concept and experience of dreams, it's much trickier than we often give it credit for. Most of us probably learned about dream when we were kids and we had a bad dream. We go see our parents and then they tell us something along the lines, "Oh, don't worry, Jimmy, it was just a dream." So the first time you hear that, you go, just a dream. What does that mean? Is that like there's a real monster under my bed, but it can't eat me? It's my Uncle Jim that's dressed in some kind of something that scares me. It's something that I should be afraid of, but as long as I'm not in the room, it's like, what is this concept? What is this thing dream? I mean, I had something chasing me, and that's why the children will go see their parents. And also when you tell them this is just a dream, they don't go, "Oh, fine, I'll go back to bed." They're like, can I sleep with you right now? Because man, they don't want to go back and what's hiding in their closet or under the bed. So we're all familiar with dreams and the concept of dreams, but like I said, it's quite tricky. When my nephew was 5 years old, he thought he understood what dreams were about, or so he thought. And so one day, I'm a clinical psychologist and a clinical researcher, and so I had no kids of my own at the time, so Sebastian, unfortunately, was one of my go-to people when I'd go visit my sister. So I asked Sebastian, do you sometimes remember your dreams? And he goes, "Yeah, I do." I went, "That's great. And where do these dreams take place?" And he goes, "Well, they're like in front of me." "In front of you how?" "Well, they're just like all around me, in front of me, and I see them with my eyes." I went, "Oh, you see them with your eyes?" He goes, "Well, yeah, not with my ears." I went, "Okay, fine." He already had an attitude when he was 5. And so I said, tell me, when you have these dreams, are you awake or are you asleep? He looks at me strangely, goes, asleep, of course. All right, and when you sleep, are your eyes open or are they closed? Because closed. So if you dream while you are asleep and your eyes are closed, how do you see your dream? Because you said you see them with your eyes. And then he looked at me and then called my sister. And when Uncle Tony's asking me those stupid questions again. So already starting with Piaget and many other child psychologists, we know that children go through different stages in understanding what we mean by this is just a dream. So most children start off believing that dreams are real. These are real events that happened. They also believe that they originate from outside the dream. And if you ask young children where dreams come from, they might answer from the clouds, from the sky, from the air, or depending on their teachings, they may say from God or some other entity. Many also believe that they can be seen by others. If other people are in the bedroom while they're dreaming, they will assume that they saw whatever they dreamt as well. So it's not till, depending on the studies, till they're 6 or 8 years old that they come to understand 3 fundamental characteristics of dreams. One is that they are internal experiences. 2, that they are private. They're not observable by other people. And 3, that they are imaginary events, that is, created by the mind. However, people can confuse dreams with reality, and I don't have time to get into this, but there are several kinds of neurological conditions and sleep disorders where the experience of dreams is so vividly encoded in memory that people confuse dreams and reality. Things that they dreamt about, they believe that they actually occurred. Now, to make things even more complicated, dreams have 3 interrelated meanings. The first one, of course, is that dreams refer to these experiences we have while we are asleep. And usually they're experienced as a series of events, right? So perceptions and thoughts and social interactions that often are quite complex. It can be bizarre, but they have sort of a narrative structure. But dreams are also the memory we have of that event once we awaken. And finally, dream is the written or drawn report or spoken report of what we remember. Now, whether you are someone just interested in working with dreams, whether you are a sleep and dream scientist, no one studies dreams directly. All we have access to are dream reports. And so that is a challenge, but it's not unique to dreams, by the way. How many of you have already experienced pain, lower back pain, any kind of pain? Everyone. Okay. So if I'm, taking out my garbage to the curb and it's a big bin and I'm grimacing as I'm taking it, you might go, oh, Tony is in pain. But maybe I'm grimacing because, it's 6 a.m. and I don't want to take my garbage out and my kids should be doing it. Or point is, even when you go see your doctor and says, oh, I have a lower back pain, they have no instrument that they can go, bzzzt. Oh yeah, I see, grade 2 pain. It's like, no, they have to ask you about it. Is it a piercing pain, a burning pain? Is it a dull pain? When does it occur? Does it radiate? So pain is also a private, subjective experience that we can infer, much like dreams are. So we study pain by studying reports, what people tell us about it. Same thing with dreams, and we have 3 primary ways of studying dreams. The first one is in the sleep laboratory. So people come in this lab, we put electrodes on their scalp, and it allows us to answer particular questions about dreams. In what stage of sleep are people most likely to have vivid dreams? What happens in the body or in the brain when people experience nightmares? How do breathing patterns fluctuate? You can also wake up people multiple times during the night to try to get different dream reports at different moments. So it answers those kinds of questions. But you can also ask people to keep home dream journals. And so if you want to have a good idea of what kind of dreams people have, usually you need to have at least a dream diary over several weeks so that you have at least 15, 20 dreams per participant. That's usually enough to start giving you an idea of what are the themes that come up, where are the main settings, who are the characters, what's the nature of the social interaction. So if you're interested in asking questions, well, does dream content relate to personality measures, to well-being? This kind of approach is a very useful one. And finally, sometimes we have no choice but to use questionnaires. If I want to know what is the most intense nightmare you've ever had, or I want to know what is the first dream that you can remember from your childhood, well, I can't bring you to a lab and figure that out. I just got to ask you and you'll write out some kind of response. Now, I mentioned that it's also important, or we know now increasingly so, we need to understand some basics about sleep to understand dreams. So here we have something that's known as a hypnogram, which is a depiction of different sleep stages throughout a night. So this is the hours of sleep. So you go to bed here. W is stage wakefulness. R is for REM sleep. I'll get to that, but it's where most vivid dreaming takes place. N1, N2, and N3 are different stages of sleep, each one more deeper than the preceding one. So when you go to bed at night, after you sort of have this transition called N1, which is a transition between wakefulness and sleep, where you're kind of dozing off. And then you enter a phase of N2, which is the first real stage of sleep. And N3 is the deepest stage of sleep of all. And then it's like an elevator. You've gone down and then you come back up to these lighter stages, and that roughly takes 90 minutes in adults. And then you have your first period of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And then this cycle repeats itself, always about for 90 minutes. But as the night progresses, you have less and less slow wave sleep, so N3 sleep, that deep stage of sleep, and your periods of REM sleep start getting longer and longer. So you are more likely to remember dreams when you wake up in the morning than if you wake up early in the night. But one thing that is interesting here is that dreaming takes place across these different sleep stages. So as you drift off into sleep, often people can have images appear before their eyes, or they can have various kinds of dreamlike thought patterns, something also known as hypnagogic imagery, often related to creativity. In N3, the deepest stage of sleep is also where you have things such as sleepwalking and sleep terrors, which on occasion are also related with some kind of mental content that at times resembles dreaming. N2, the stage of sleep, that's about 50% of any given night we spend in N2. In about 60% of the time when we wake up people, they will remember something that is close to dreaming. It just tends to be a bit more thought-like and less emotional and less bizarre than dreams from later on in the night. And then you have these periods of rapid eye movement sleep. And that is where generally the most vivid, narratively driven, bizarre, engaging dreams take place. It's also where most nightmares, recurrent dreams, and lucid dreams take place. And your last REM period before you awaken in the morning can be as long as 20, 30, even 40 minutes, of which you might recall 0 or just a small fragment. So there's a lot of dreaming that takes place every night of our lives. And not only that, but when you compare the dreams from early in the night to later in the night, they tend to become always a bit more emotional, a bit more bizarre, and a bit more narratively structured. So there's changes in the content within each sleep cycle and across the night as well. Now, REM sleep, where most vivid dreaming takes place, is a fascinating stage of sleep. Actually, when it was discovered back in 1953, the researchers were confused because they thought their participants were awake. When they were looking on the paper, the electrodes, the electrical activity of the brain, they went, oh, our participant is awake. And then they went in the sleep chamber and the person was fast asleep. They're going, I don't get it. Their EEG looks like they're awake, but they're asleep. And so that's the first feature of REM sleep, is that the brain activity really looks like someone who is wide awake. The second one is that all of our major muscle groups are actually paralyzed when we are in REM sleep. And I'll get to a little later as to why that is so. But when you are in REM sleep, it's your motor cortex, a part of your brain that controls your arm movement, leg movements, and so on, is activated also as if you were awake. So if you're dreaming that you are running down the road, your cortex is sending signals to your legs to run. And if it wasn't for this paralysis that takes place at the base of your neck, you would act out the content of your dreams, which is not a good thing because your eyes are closed and you'll run into a wall. And there's actually a disorder known as REM sleep behavior disorder that develops more often in men than in women, usually after the age of 50, where this atonia starts malfunctioning and people start acting out the content of their dreams, sometimes injuring themselves, sometimes injuring their spouse, and that is related to some neurological disorders such as Parkinson's disease down the road, sometimes even 5, 10, 15 years later. So it's REM sleep behavior disorder is sort of a precursor of some of these neurodegenerative diseases. Anyway, so we have this, our brains are really active, our muscles are paralyzed, and then under our closed eyelids, we have these rapid eye movements. The eyes keep darting back and forth, as if you were scanning or looking at things. Here's what these eye movements look like. And you can observe them on anyone, or even a neonate or a young baby under their closed eyelids. And so that is one sign that they are immersed in REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is not the same thing as dreaming. And unfortunately, to this day, people will say, oh, we discovered that REM sleep does this, so dreaming must do that. Right? So in one study, they found that depriving rats of REM sleep caused their brains to heat up. And so some of the media are saying, oh, dreams help cool down your brain. Well, no, they don't. So REM sleep is a physiological stage. There's very clear parameters to decide. Dreams are these subjective experiences we have. So when we will ask the question, do dreams have a function? We don't want to know if, well, what is the function of acetylcholine that is being modulated by the thalamus while you are asleep? You want to know, why is my brain creating all these scenarios? Why was I dreaming of this? You know, no one wakes up and goes, oh, honey, you won't believe it. Last night, my prefrontal cortex completely deactivated. And as far as I could tell, no acetylcholine from my hippocampus. Like, what do you make of it? Oh, that's so bizarre, honey. Like, no. Right? We want to know about the content. So REM sleep is one thing, but dreaming is another thing. And so when we talk about the function of dreams, what we're asking is these virtual worlds that our minds put us in on a nightly basis, does that have a function independently of what's going on in the brain underneath? Because the brain could do all of these things without creating these dreams. So that is important. And so when we get to try to explaining dreams, I will come back to this distinction. Now we know now that sleep, far from being a passive thing, has many functions. Growth hormones, tissue repair, insulin regulation. So if you deprive someone for 5 nights, even young, healthy adults, you let them sleep 4 hours a night for 5 nights, they can take a blood sample, they already start looking pre-diabetic. Is also involved in immune system function. You know, when there was all this talk about vaccinations and their efficacy, one thing that many researchers were surprised on is that there was very little talk about the importance of getting a good night's sleep before you get vaccinated and after. And up to 30% of the antibodies generated after vaccination could be augmented or decreased depending on how well you slept before and after you get vaccinated, which is not trivial. But we also now know that, and then there's cleaning of brain toxins. It just 8 years ago, which is really recent, discovered that there's this lymphatic system in the brain, and that when you're sleeping, the cerebrospinal fluid that comes into the brain and washes out these toxins that accumulate during the day. And we also believe that dysfunctions in this is also related in some people to the development of some forms of dementia. But we also now know that sleep plays a crucial role in emotional regulation, memory consolidation, and memory evolution. Memory evolution just refers to once you learn or you see something, how does it evolve over time? How does it get integrated into everything else you've seen or learned about yourself or the world or the interaction of the two? And all sleep stages don't contribute to these processes equally. So we know that N2, for instance, is very important for motor learning. If you're learning to ski, play the piano, guitar, anything of that nature. Certain kinds of verbal acquisitions are more dependent on slow wave sleep. And REM sleep is very important for encoding and treating emotional memories and also certain forms of problem solving. And so the question becomes, well, we have different forms of dreams in each one of these stages. When you fall asleep, in deep sleep, in intermediate N2, and in REM. So dreaming also, just like sleep, isn't homogeneous. You have different things going on across different sleep stages. Now, when people have explored the function of dreams, there's many models have been put out there, but in our view, many of them are overly simplistic. So the first is, well, whatever the function of REM sleep is, that's the function of dreams. As I said, REM sleep is a physiologically defined state. Dreams are a subjective experience. One is not equal to the other. And we also know that dreams take place in other stages of sleep. And actually, there's people who can have certain kinds of cerebral vascular accidents who no longer experience REM sleep, but who still dream. So the two can be dissociated. So that can't be the case. Dreams help us solve problems. There's no doubt that sometimes they do, and there's many famous examples about that. But who here has solved an important problem in their life in the last month because of a dream they had? Exactly. So, and many of you are dreaming a couple hours every night. Like, how can you be so inefficient solving your problems, right? And I'm in the same boat. So it can happen, but it probably isn't the function because, boy, it happens so rarely. And then you also have people who never remember their dreams. So for them, all this nightly activity they don't recall has no function. Dreams have a threat simulation function. These are evolutionary theories that says dreams developed in our ancestors to help us perceive and react to different threats in our environments. The problem with that is many dreams don't have any kinds of threats, not physical threats, but also these models say that the dreams help us rehearse adaptive behaviors to these threats. And what happens usually if you're chased in a dream? Well, you'll wake up. And if you're chased in real life, waking up, that won't work very well. Okay? Some people will fly away in their dream. Yeah, good luck with that as well. So dreams rarely contain really evolutionary adaptive ways of dealing with physical threats, and very few dreams have direct physical threats. There's the idea that dreams play a role in emotional regulation. And while we know that sleep certainly does, there's very little convincing data that dreams itself, when you look at the content of people's dreams, how that contributes to emotional regulation. And about 40% of all dreams have no emotions in them. They're reported as being neutral, or people are just thinking about things, especially when we study this in the laboratory. And some people say, well, we have dreams so we can interpret them. How many dreams have you interpreted in the last month? Wow, again, so you're not solving problems, you're not interpreting them. So that can't be. And again, some people go through their entire lives without working with a dream, and that sets aside the question of who interprets them? How do you know it's right? And so if people were interpreting dreams before Freud, were they all wrong? So that's probably not it. But they probably all have a grain of truth in them. And probably dreams are so complex and varied and delightfully wonderful and complex that I think that many of these theories are just too simplistic. It does much more than any one of these things. It's like saying, watching people debate what the function of the tongue is. Ooh, the tongue is to speak, of course. No, the tongue is so you can chew your food. No, it helps you swallow your food. And if you'd be watching this, you'd be going, wow, what idiots. It does all of that and maybe more. And dreams might be the same thing. So one of the more recent models of dreaming that I've contributed to, along with Bob Stickle from Harvard University, has just an acronym called Next Step, but basically tries to integrate a lot of these new findings about sleep and dreams into a much more comprehensive model. So we think that the dreaming brain, creates these narratives that we experience like real events while we are immersed in it. So it's a world of imaginary creations. We also do so in a form of embodied self. In our dreams, we experience them from often our first-person perspective, and we have a body and we navigate our dream environment. We're not just passively observing things. And we also experience thoughts and emotions in response to our dreams. That's why you get angry at a dream character, or you get frightened by something happening in your dream, or you are delighted to meet a loved one who has recently passed away, and you go, oh my gosh, they're there in front of me, and it's a transportive experience. So dreams make us react in certain ways while we are in them. And we also know that, I'll take a step back. When MRIs were starting to be used, they would often ask people, well, just relax and let your mind wander while we start calibrating the machines and so on for the real experiments. And then some people realized that across different labs across the world, people's brains were showing the same patterns of activation when they were just told to do nothing. Right? It's before their experiments. And this became known as the default mode network. It's what your brain does when you are not driving a car, not thinking, not engaged in something, when you're just sitting back and relaxing and letting your mind wander. And it's an actual network of areas in your brain that gets activated. And so that's your default activity. And now we know that this default mode network is what gets really activated in REM sleep, where most vivid dreaming takes place, which has led some people to suggest that dreaming is really an intensified form of mind wandering. But it also has an evolutionary purpose, and it embodies our ongoing conceptions of ourselves, of the people we love, of the world around us, and the interactions of all of this. And that's what your brain creates in your dreams. We also know now that your brain, because of the neurochemical state it is in, particularly in REM sleep, doesn't have access to some things you do when you are awake. So what are known as episodic memories are very rare in dreams. Episodic memories are your memories for events as they occurred. And you rarely dream of things as they occurred in real life. You'll say, yeah, I dreamt of the time I was back at the beach, but there were all these buildings there. There's always something that is very different. And it's because you don't have access to these memories because of, again, neural circuits activation, deactivation. What we do have access are semantic memories. These are your knowledge of the world around you. So you know that grass is green, or that leaves turn different colors in the fall. What are the sounds of different letters, things of that nature. You also have access to what are known as non-declarative memories. These can be motor, like how to ride a bike, but also if you hear the first tunes of a song that you already know, you can have the lyrics come with it. And this is quite amazing because it can happen even years after you had that song. So your sleeping brain, your dreaming brain has access to these kinds of memories. And this is probably why dreams are inherently bizarre, metaphorical, very expansive, and hyper-associative. And there's good evidence also that dreams tend to embody our current concerns, what are on our minds, but it doesn't do so directly. It tells stories about them, very unusual stories. And the reason the stories are unusual are, for one thing, for the neurochemistry we are in when we dream. So this one transmitter, norepinephrine, is usually shut down in our sleep, and particularly in REM sleep. And norepinephrine is what one of the things it does is allows us to focus, to pay attention, to track things, to be goal-directed. Things that we rarely are while we are dreaming. Our dreams tend to shift the scenes, the people, and we often don't have good access in terms of being able to plan and execute things in our dreams. We believe them to be real, and we fail to recognize how unusual or bizarre they are until we wake up. There's also serotonin is greatly diminished or shut off, and this probably contributes to the sense of meaning in our dreams. For instance, the same levels of serotonin can be found when people take psychedelic substances, such like psilocybin, and where people feel their experiences are imbued with meaning, which probably also explains why historically people have been fascinated by the question of what does it mean? There's this underlying feeling that these experiences have, they bring something to us, so there's some meaning hidden in it. Hence, 1001 Dreams Interpreted, and all these long histories and ways of trying to decipher the meaning of dreams. We also know that parts of the prefrontal cortex are deactivated. What does that do? Well, that's responsible for us being able to have judgment, which we often don't have very much of while we are dreaming. So I might be dreaming that I have a twin brother who walks in, and instead of going, well, that doesn't make sense, I don't have a twin brother, I go, oh my gosh, my twin brother, right? So our dreams are we're usually not quite logical in them. It's because these areas that are responsible for what are known as executive functions are generally deactivated when we are dreaming. And we also know that other areas that also help us perceive and experience emotions, the limbic system is activated, hence the emotional quality of some of our dreams. So this model here that tries to take what we know about the neurochemistry, neurophysiology, what we know about sleep, different stages of sleep, and dream content, is wrapped into this model of dream function, but also helps explain things I don't quite have time to go into here, about bizarreness, the emotions, why dreams often have a narrative structure, why people tend to forget the majority of their dreams, and why dreams can lead to creativity and insights on occasion. It also explains different kinds of dreams that we can experience, including recurrent dreams, nightmares, lucid dreams, and these often intriguing dreams that we can have as we are falling asleep, known as hypnagogic dreams. And it's also the first model of dream function that doesn't talk about dreams as a whole, but dreams as a function of different sleep stages. And we think that the function of dreams is also driven by what happens in each underlying sleep stage. So we think that as we are falling asleep, Your brain is tagging, what did I experience today? What was emotionally salient? What's on my mind? What have I been ruminating about? And it tags these things for later processing. When you enter N2, and those dreams tend to be more thought-like and incorporate more recent memories, and we know that from dozens of studies, your brain is probably going, what is there recently that ties into this? And then as you get into later REM periods, your brain is looking into older memories, older events that we've had, our older autobiographical understanding of ourselves, and starts opening different drawers. Does what happened to me today fit in here? Does it fit in here? Does it fit in here? And how does it know if it fits? It creates these scenarios and examines how you react to them. And so how we react in the dream and how the dream reacts to us, because people in the dream, we tell them something and they'll answer, they'll react differently, helps guide the brain in understanding how to make sense of what we experience during the day. So we think that for every 2 hours you are awake, your brain needs to shut down for an hour to make sense of that, and that dreams play a role in this. But the way it tries to make sense is not at all like what we tend to do while we are awake, trying to be sort of logical or linear and putting things together. It does the opposite. It takes a memory and goes in all kinds of different directions, and what is known as divergent thinking. And that's why dreams are hyper-associative and largely bizarre. It does things that we cannot do while we are awake. And so it tries to make sense of what our experiences may mean. But when we talk about like even memory consolidation is like learning facts. It's sort of like I've learned something, now I've memorized it. That's not ultimately very useful. It might make you smart. What's really useful is, how do I use this? How does this fit in? And that's what makes you wise. And we think that dreams contribute to this wisdom. So in sum, dreams, far from not having a function, have a very crucial functions, and they're carried out by the brain when you are asleep, regardless of whether you remember your dreams or not. And that to execute these functions, your brain actually needs to dream. Now, I just want to take a little moment to talk about a particular kind of dream, because there's some very fascinating studies about this, known as lucid dreaming. And lucid dreams are those in which you become aware that you are dreaming while you are still in the dream. But what is particularly fascinating is that when people become aware they were dreaming and they are in a sleep lab, they can signal this to the experimenters in the lab. So think about it. You have a participant who's in the lab, asleep, dreaming, and from their dream, they're going to send you a signal saying, hey, I know I'm at the lab and I know I'm dreaming right now. And so I'm about to carry out an experiment. And how do they do that? With the eye movements. You know, when I showed you the little video of the eye moving under the closed eyelids, you tell the people, if you will become aware that you're dreaming, I want you to move your eyes left, right, these extreme movements, like 4 times, then wait and do it again. And when you monitor eye movements in the sleep lab, these rapid eye movements, they really stand out. This is the first signal sent from an experimenter, from a lucid dreamer to an experimenter. It's actually now at the Science Museum in London. So that's sort of what it looks. And so you have people literally communicating to researchers from their dream by moving their eyes, which gets picked up by the electrodes on their real eyes. One of the first studies was just to know, if you count to 10 in your dreams, how long does it take? Well, you have someone signal, they count to 10, they signal again. And then you can look, how long did it take? Well, it takes roughly 10 seconds. You can also ask them to estimate 10 seconds. And how long does it take? Yeah, roughly 10 seconds. So, you have all these things about time perception in dreams. And it's true that dreams, much like films, can take over, can seem to last over long periods or even decades. But for micro time counting, it's very much like wakefulness. And it's also been done for longer periods, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And when people do this in their dreams, it's pretty close to real time. But there's other things. There's actually studies that have asked people, okay, when you become aware that you're dreaming, do an eye signal, and then we want you to do an exercise. In this study here done in Germany, someone had to find, which is pretty amazing, had to find sort of a gym or something and take some weights and do squats and signal when they're starting to do squats. And what do you see? Well, when they become lucid, this person here, for instance, had a heart rate of 71, the respiration rate was 19 breaths per minute. They start doing 10 squats, the respiration rate is up to 29. Their heart rate shoots up to 81. So just doing these exercises in your dreams, your physical body that's in the lab is reacting to it as if you were really exercising, even though you're not moving. That's interesting. We know that if you contract your hand, left hand or right hand, we know through brain imaging exactly what areas of the motor cortex are involved. In this study here, they had lucid dreamers signal that they are aware they're dreaming, and then do these same movements with their right or left hand that they do that they did when they are awake. So in this image here, it shows which part of the motor cortex are activated when you clench either your right or your left fist. And here's some brain imaging of what it looks like when you do it in your dream. They're virtually identical. So as far as your brain is concerned, dreaming of doing something is pretty close, at least physically, as really doing it. And again, keep in mind that if it wasn't for this motor inhibition at the base of your neck, you'd be acting out the content of your dreams. Your hand would be going like this. So it's not that surprising. People have also started looking at, well, what happens differently in your brain when you realize that you're dreaming? Well, I told you that the prefrontal cortex is generally deactivated, but in lucid dreams, it tends to come back online. And so it allows for what is known as metacognition, being able to plan and execute things, which these people are able to do. They've got to remember, oh yeah, I'm in a lab, I got to do these eye signals, then I got to do this activity and signal again. Very complex things to keep in mind while you are dreaming. We also know the areas of the brain that are responsible for the experience of the self, first-person perspective, episodic memories are generally more activated, and this also corresponds to what lucid dreamers do. Finally, for me, one of the most fascinating studies is that we know that in wakefulness, if you ask people, hold out your thumb like this, and then draw a circle with it, a big circle, and follow the tip of your thumb with your eyes. When you do it, just as I did it now, that's what it looks like. That's what your eye movements look like. And of course, it makes sense. I've been following my thumb. However, if you ask people, close your eyes and imagine your thumb being there and follow it, this is what it looks like. Okay? People are, and it's called smooth eye tracking. And if you don't have a real physical object to track, to just do it in your imagination, well, it goes haywire. Your eyes just don't track much. But they had lucid dreamers do that in their dream. Track their dream thumb. What does it look like? Pretty much like wakefulness. So what does this tell us? It tells us that in many respects, dreams are much closer to perception than they are to just imagination. Now, lucid dreaming is also used to train athletes to perform skills, skiing, playing darts. There's different things that have been tried. It's also used to treat nightmares. So it also has many practical, interesting applications. And I might get this into more tomorrow, but lucid dreams also allow you to interact with dream characters in ways that you can't in lucid dreams. And sometimes if you hear people speak about lucid dreams, they might say, oh, in your lucid dream, you can control everything. No, you can't. And I'm serious, and I've been studying this for most of my life. So you might be a really good lucid dreamer. I'm intermediate. But even if you're able to create a dream character or call up a dream character. So things that I've done. So you call up a dream character in your dream, go, oh wow, great, here's Brad Pitt or whomever. But then you ask them a question. You ask them, what are you doing in my dream? Or what's the most important thing I should know? You have no idea what they're gonna say next. But you've created them, your brain is creating them, and your brain knows what they're gonna say next, but not you. There's a lot of elements in the dream that you are not consciously aware of, nor in control. Same thing, you might have a lucid dream going, oh, I'd love to be in an outdoor cafe in Paris. And you close your eyes in the dream, you imagine the cafe and you open up and bingo, there you are at a cafe in Paris. Great. Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? What's the traffic like outside? What clothes are you wearing? Are those really your shoes? Are those really your socks? Or what are the people around you eating? Now you can pay attention in the lucid dream of all of those, but you won't have decided any of it. Your brain will. So you are not the driver of the dream, even in a lucid dream. Your dreaming brain is. Now, I just said that people can use lucid dreaming to communicate to the outside world, to the experimenters, that they are aware of dreaming. As of 2021, and with a few other studies now, we now know that two-way communications with lucid dreamers is possible. And this isn't science fiction, this is actually science. And so what people do is they've tried to use different stimuli, either speaking words or flashing lights over the eyes of the sleeping subject, or having little electrical shocks delivered to their fingers or their wrists. And sometimes these stimuli get incorporated into the dream. A bit like sometimes if your alarm clock goes off and you don't wake up, but you hear the music in the dream, and then so there's these incorporations. And so here's one thing, here's one of the results of the study. So here's a participant in the sleep lab, they're in REM sleep. And by the way, you can't fake this because there's electrodes that you can detect this muscle paralysis, and you can't fake the muscle paralysis like under your chin and where it's measured. And as soon as you wake up, there's activation. So these people are in unequivocal REM sleep. So these do these first eye movements going, hey, I'm lucid. You know, I'm waiting for the stimuli. And then the person got irritated because there's nothing, because I'm lucid. You know, I'm waiting here. And then they heard a voice say 8 minus 6. And that was the experimenter asking the person a question. And what did they do? They do 2 eye signals to say the answer is 2. And then they waited, 8 minus 6, the answer is 2. So it's very simple experiments, but people are asking them questions, it's getting incorporated into their dreams, and then they're responding. You can do with eye movements, you can do with many different things. So you have these muscles over your eyes, and if in a dream you pull your eyebrows up very strongly, and you have electrodes in the sleep lab over your real eyebrows, you'll see these muscle activity. You also have these muscles around your chin if you're smiling. So they told these participants, this was in France, where if you hear a question and the answer is no, we want you to raise your eyebrows in your dream. And if the answer is yes, we want you to make a big grin. Right? So big grin is yes, and raising your eyebrows is no, and people are asleep and have these electrodes, and that can be detected. So here they had a participant who was asleep, and then there's a question, do you watch football? No. Do you like chocolate? Yes. Right? Very simple, but it's proof of concept about two-way communication. And this opens up a whole new way of investigating dreams, because you can ask people to do particular things in real time, and then look what's going on in their brain and their bodies when people are doing specific activities in their brains. The other fascinating thing is to notice how these activities get incorporated into the dream. So I was at a party with friends. Your voice was coming from the outside, just like a narrator of a movie. I decided to answer with no, with facial muscle contractions. Someone else had a saying, I was in my living room, I was watching TV, and all of a sudden this booming voice came out of the TV. It was the voice of the experimenter. So how this gets incorporated, these external stimuli, are interesting. One participant that had over their closed eyelids in the lab, the experimenters were flashing lights, and they said, when the lights started flickering in the dream, I recognized this as a Morse-coded signal from the outside and counted 4, then 2, and reported the answer 4 with eye signals. The last one, during the finger tapping, this is like little electrical shocks delivered to the person's finger. During the finger tapping, I was fighting against goblins. I remember being surprised that I was able to do so many things at the same time as the task. The person's like, oh yeah, I'm in the lab and I got a signal, but damn, these goblins here, I gotta fight off. So, cool stuff. Finally, a few words about a new area called dream engineering. So, dream engineering is a term that refers to attempts to use different forms of technologies and devices to try to manipulate or induce certain kinds of dreams. And this can be done to enhance creativity, to treat nightmares. There's also very potentially negative sides to all of this, but I'll just mention a few of them. In the center here, this is a device developed by some colleagues at MIT called Dormio. It's a little device you wear on your hand as you fall asleep. And you can program the device to say whatever recording you want as you're falling asleep. So it could be, think of a tree, think of a tree, think of a tree. And these devices measure your transition from wakefulness to sleep. And if it wakes you up just as you're falling off to sleep, the person will go, oh yes, I had this image of an oak tree. All right. If you let them slip a little longer, they're going to say, oh, I was in the middle of this forest and it was really cool. There was like these giant pines. And if you let them go right between this hypnagogic state and the first real stage of sleep, they might report fantastic things. Like I was in this underground tunnel with all these roots, and all these roots were talking to each other. And the trees had a language, so it gets more and more creative and bizarre. And so this is just from a simple prompt saying, think of a tree. So this is a way to foster creativity. If you sense a smell when people are in REM sleep, you can influence if people have positive dreams or more negative dreams. The smells themselves won't get incorporated, so you can have smells of freshly cut flowers, and they're not going to dream that there's these smells, but they're more likely to dream of positive things. Same thing if you present them with smells of rotten fish or eggs, they tend to have negative emotions in their dreams. VR, you can have people engage in virtual reality, flying dreams, things of that nature, and that is more likely to induce flying dreams, lucid dreams. So people are working more and more with these things, but these can also be used. There are many actually now, over 250 some advertising companies who already declared at a conference 2 years ago that they are working on methods to try to implant advertising in people's sleep. It's okay, don't groan, because give me $10 a month and I'll guarantee you ad-free dreams, okay? But, so yeah, there's actually been, people pointed out there's actually been cartoons about this and shows about this in the past, but they are actively working on it. And so no one knows if it's feasible, not feasible, but we do know the sleeping brain does a lot of computations. We know that it consolidates a lot of memories. We also, I'll take 2 minutes because there's a really, really cool study. So there's these smokers were brought into a sleep lab, and they had to keep a diary of how often they smoked. And they were told, you're gonna take part in an experiment where we're gonna maybe present smells to you, maybe not, and we wanna know if it has an impact on your dreams. So fine. So these people come into the lab and they get presented with, unbeknownst to them, the smell of cigarettes paired with rotten fish. Okay? Yes, but this is done for about 10 seconds in one sleep stage. That's it, 10 seconds in the whole period of night. They wake up, they go, do you remember any smells? No, blah, blah, blah. Okay, off they go. They still have to keep a dream diary of different things, including cigarette consumption. Cigarette consumption the following week went down 30%. Anyway, I just don't feel like smoking like I used to. Now, cool, but these are people who you modified their behavior in a positive way, but they don't know why. In another study, and by the way, if you do this pairing when they are awake, it has no effect. Right? You can do it for an hour and they'll go, that's gross. You know? Now, can I go and have a cigarette? Okay. So there's something about the power of the sleeping brain. Again, our brain does things differently in sleep than in wakefulness. A study where they asked people a simple question: you prefer Skittles or M&Ms? People go Skittles. Okay, fine. Let them sleep. And during the night, they're presented with a stimuli that just says M&Ms, M&Ms, M&Ms. And then they wake up in the morning. They go, oh, thank you for taking part in our study. And oh, we got these bags of Skittles or M&Ms. You know, which one do you want? You know what? I'll take the M&Ms. So you can change people's preferences. And this is about 70% of people who changes just with these. Now, people sleep with all kinds of devices in the rooms. People sleep with devices that record their breathing because for snoring. Young people have all these kinds of sleep apps. So companies are collecting a lot of data on people's sleep staging. There's electronic devices present. It's not that far-fetched to think in a few years down the road you can combine all of this to try to influence people. Now I'm talking about advertising, but it can be for political reasons. It can be for whatever your Machiavellian imagination can come up with. So, fascinating area of study, opens up interesting windows, but if really simple dream researchers like myself can do it with very little budget, advertising companies that have unlimited means, and think how much they pay for a 30-second ad during the Super Bowl. Now, what if you could access 8 hours every night? Millions of people. Oh, more than a Super Bowl ad, and probably more effective. So, dreams, fascinating world, a lot of things to discover, a lot of things we still don't know about, where the characters come, the memory sources. I mean, we're getting pieces of the puzzle, but there's still a long ways to go. And that is one of the beauties of studying dreams. Thank you.
Is it on? Stay right there. You need to answer the questions.
I don't get to wake up now?
No, you don't. No, it's all.
I've had this dream
It's all
before,
a bad dream.
and I have no idea what the answers are.
One of the things that's interesting about being on the program committee, a lot of the things that Tony was talking about, like that sleep study and the subliminal advertising, we looked at that 4 months ago, and I'd forgotten all about it. And he just brings it all back, and I'm going, oh, I wonder what's going to happen when the next cycle of events. Remember that? Okay, Eva, wait for the microphone. It's coming in the back. Put your hands up good and high so I can.
I'm not sure how your two-way communication works, in the sense that you try that on me and I'll wake up.
Oh, all right. So what I didn't tell you is, I did tell you it works. I didn't tell you how often it works. So it takes on average, and this is with really good lucid dreamers, okay, which like 1% of the population. And to get one of these things working, you got to do about 30 trials. Okay, so this study is like the first one. It was 6 different labs across the world. Each one found something similar, doing different stimuli. But it's hard. It's hard to get these incorporations without waking the person up. And in one case, one person responded correctly, and when you woke them up, they had no recollection of the dream. So, so it's not as easy as it seems, but this is like really the first study. And now people are working on olfactory stimuli, like these little sniff things really implanted in the nostrils that seem to be much more effective. And so there's different ways. If you do it in naps instead of nighttime, it also appears to be more effective. So it takes particular participants to do this, and you need to and not all of them can do it all of the time. So it's more proof of concept. It can be done.
What if the dream precedes the actual physical state without any external interference by, an outsider in a lab situation?
I'm not quite sure I understand your
Okay.
question. If you can give me an example, maybe?
I had a dream.
Yeah.
And I was all rolled up. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. People were talking all about me and I could hear them, but I couldn't respond. I woke up. I couldn't speak. I had rictus and I couldn't hold anything. I thought I'll just wait until this dream ends, but it got worse and worse. I phoned 911. The phone dropped out of my hand. All of that. So the dream was there first.
Well, the dream, it's fascinating, first of all. And so 2 things could be happening. One, it could be that these things are really going on, right, while you were dreaming, and they're getting incorporated in dreams. So there's a few case studies, for instance, of people having heart attacks, but which they survived, and they had them while they were in REM sleep. And in a few cases, people remember the dream they were having, and sometimes the chest pain was incorporated in the dream. In another one, the man was about to have supper, and his wife serves him a raw steak, and then sticks a fork in it, and he goes, ugh, right? But he was having a heart attack. So it could be there's things in our physiology that is going on, and it gets incorporated into the dream. And I think that's probably maybe more likely than the dream starting something and then it happens. But that could be possible too. There's a lot of things, and I haven't had time to talk about the far side of dreams, put it that way. But there's some interesting anecdotes and material there too. So precognitive dreams and things of that nature, which many can be explained without, supernatural explanations, but not all. So both could be happening, but I think the most likely is that your dreaming brain is already incorporating things that are really going on in your body at that time.
Thank you. I'd like to ask. Is it on? Okay. I'd like to ask about hypnosis.
Yeah.
Because hypnosis works like this dream engineering, where you can make a suggestion to people under hypnosis, and it results in them maybe giving up cigarettes or not eating something they shouldn't be eating. Isn't really looked at a relationship between dreaming and hypnosis state?
That's another very good question. There's a long history of interest into the 2 states. Now, hypnosis, again, the results are highly variable. You need hypnotizable people for one, and so there's different ways of assessing that. There's the Stanford scale, Harvard scale, but it's not in everyone that it works equally. And even in people who are highly hypnotizable, the results are variable, not always long-lasting. But they do have, what's common is that they're both in an altered state of consciousness, so hypnosis, deep relaxation, often abandonment, and dreaming even more, so you're in many respects cut off from your external environment. And your brain is functioning in ways that are different from full-fledged wakefulness, even more so, I would say, in dreaming than in hypnosis, but it is quite different and it might be more receptive. It could also be the case even for new studies looking at therapeutic effects of psychedelics, sort of, for instance, psilocybin to treat untractable depression, with 2 sessions having sometimes long impacts. I think that under the influence of these substances, the brain is receptive, is reorganizing. So it might be some similar mechanisms between what you mentioned about hypnosis and some of these dream engineering. But the dream engineering, there's tons of tools. I mean, from across the senses. There's even bodysuits you can wear that can vibrate and do things. And also you could do it in different sleep stages. So doing it in REM sleep can have a different effect from doing it at sleep onset or in N2, beginning of the night, end of the night. Yes?
Would you speak
Oh,
to
sorry.
Thank you for your talk. I just noticed I have an interesting observation. When you spoke about the function of dreaming, including next up, the language you used involved the word brain a lot. The brain does this, the brain does that, the brain needs this, the brain needs that. And then when you started speaking about lucid dreaming, it wasn't the brain anymore. It was the individual needs this, the individual needs that, the conscious individual needs this, and so on. And then you said that for the most part, when you're dreaming, the prefrontal cortex is not activated. But when you're lucid dreaming, the prefrontal cortex is activated. Are you suggesting the seat of consciousness is the prefrontal cortex?
No, it isn't. And I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that the form of consciousness you will experience will depend on what cortical resources you have access to. So if you have a brain lesion and your verbal areas get shot, you're not going to speak very well anymore, or you might not understand spoken language, but you might have other things of your consciousness that is intact. So it's just that if these areas some get deactivated, then you're not as well as functional as if they were fully online. And so in lucid dreams, it seems that some of these areas in some of the people, and you got to think, to sleep in an MRI, I don't know if any of you have had an MRI, but they're incredibly, A, they're claustrophobic, B, they're incredibly noisy. So often you have to sleep deprive people so they can fall asleep in there. But then if you're really sleep deprived, you have a lot of deep sleep and you don't have REM sleep, so you got to wait a long time before you get any data. It's very complicated, so it's not everyone who can do that. But what it tells us there, I was talking about brain areas because it's brain imaging studies. And you have an absolutely correct observation. At times I use a term mind, brain, consciousness, the person. To me, they're sort of in various ways interchangeable. Their correct use, I think, depends on what kind of studies you're talking about. So if I'm just talking about subjective experience that people are telling me about, oh, I was dreaming about this, well, then it's the person. But if I have EEG data or brain imaging data, then it's like, well, you know, the motor cortex was shut off or this became activated, but that's what the study was for. And maybe I shouldn't always be doing that, but, you know, that's how I am when I'm awake. In my dreams, I'm much more exact. But you'll have to come and visit.
I wondered if you'd speak to sleepwalking, because when I was a young person, a teenager, I used to sleepwalk, like I can remember some of those, and they were bizarre incidents where I'd end up in very peculiar places. And so, and of our 3 children, only 1 child had some sleepwalking incidents, and I just wonder if you'd speak to that.
I could give a whole hour on sleepwalking, and literally because our lab is one of the world's most better known labs to study this form of what's known as parasomnias. So we've done many studies over 20 years of sleepwalking, who has them, why, genetics, what goes on in the brain, and so, and there's a strong genetic component. So over 80% of sleepwalking individuals as adults have at least one immediate relative who's also a sleepwalker or was. And we have protocols with some geneticists trying to understand what genes might be in play. So your question about the sleepwalking tends, people ask, are they asleep or are they awake? Because you say you went far, but people have driven automobiles. People have left their house in the middle of winter in their underwear, -20, right? Unaware of the cold. People have jumped out of windows, broken a foot, a femur, in one case, both, went hobbled back inside, right? They went back to sleep on the couch. And then only when they woke up later in the morning were they in incredible pain. So we know that sleepwalkers also have altered pain perception, which is why they're out in the cold, Montreal, doing these wandering things of that nature. People ask, are they asleep or are they awake? Because if you leave the house, you've opened the door, you went downstairs, or you're navigating your environment, and most sleepwalkers have their eyes open. Some people even talk to others, right, during their episodes. And the answer is they are not asleep and they are not awake. They are both. Parts of their brains are still asleep, parts that are important or parts of the mind, parts of the person are still asleep, which makes it they have poor judgment, they might be nonsensical, they misperceive stimuli. So they might have, like one example is, person has an episode and in the darkness of their room where they have a painting, it's not a painting anymore. They see there's something on the wall, but it's a hole. Not only is it a hole, but there's a nauseous gas coming in. So they got to get all the family out of the house now, right? Because if not, everyone will be poisoned. But then they're able to wake up the spouse and say, look, we need to leave the house because of X. So there's some waking process, but they're misperceiving stimuli. And parts of them are clearly awake because they recognize there's a spouse, there's a situation. So depending on which areas are more awake and which are asleep, you can have a calm episode, agitated episode, a lot of motor movement, or it can be benign. People just point at the wall, go back to sleep. Or people can really injure themselves seriously. We had one gentleman, and when the medical doctor at the clinic asked them what brought them in to finally consult for the sleepwalking, he goes, well, it's the 4th TV I need to buy because I always think there's an intruder, and the closest, largest thing in my bedroom is the TV. And so I grab it and throw it down the stairs at the intruder. So at least it wasn't his kid that was there. It was like no one. So that's one of them. So again, there's all kinds of, so sleepwalking happens in deep sleep, in that N3, most often occurs in the first third of the night, very different from nightmares, last third, and it makes sense. In the first third is when you have more of that deep N3 sleep. So also most kids that sleepwalk often will do so within an hour and a half of going to bed, not at 6 in the morning. So genetic component, and then there's factors that can aggravate it. Sleep deprivation can aggravate it, alcohol can aggravate it, excessive exercise in the evening in some people appears to maybe, and stress. So our main two things is good sleep hygiene to minimize that, secure environment, and learning how to handle some stressors better. And someone had the question about hypnosis. That is at least in our clinic, and we see about 1,000 patients a year, it's our #1 recommended treatment for sleepwalking. It's not pharmacological, it's hypnosis. And works well in about 80% of cases. At least enough that they stop. There's also pharmacological treatments, and that can be okay if you, for a very short period of time. Someone says, look, I have to go camping next weekend. I don't want to, I don't want to wander outside my tent naked there or whatever, which has already happened. So meds, or look, I'm traveling to Europe, I'm going to be jet lagged, I don't want any of this happening. some people leave their rooms and so on. So that meds might be good, but medium term, long term, I'm not a proponent.
Got a question up front?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you could talk about trauma and dreams and nightmares, or PTSD and dreams.
Sure. Is there something in particular you'd like to know about that? I mean, the two are...
Well, why did, like, I know psilocybin, that's getting to be good, but I'm wondering, just why is it, connected so
Okay, sure.
strongly?
So many people have different kinds of traumatic events. So war veterans, rape victims, accident victims, anything that causes trauma is more likely to induce nightmares. There's many different reasons for that. These traumatic events tend to alter the people's sleep. So sleep complaints are very common. And it also alters, so when sleep gets, I mentioned sleep plays a big role in regulating our emotions. Just why, if you're sleep deprived or you do 1 or 2 all-nighters and don't sleep, what happens? Are you a bit more irritable or happy-go-lucky? No, it's like, get out of my way. Or, shh, we get more on edge, we get more irritable. Some people get more anxious, some people eat a lot more, have less good impulse control. So sleep is very important for regulating this. After trauma, we have even more things to process, and sleep is vital to do that. And by the way, also in people who have concussions, there's actually analogies to be made with the role that sleep does in recovery from that. So if you have a trauma, your sleep is often highly disturbed, and which contributes, but there's other things that happen. So I mentioned that norepinephrine usually gets shut down, especially in REM sleep. In people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, the norepinephrine levels actually shoot up. And what is in REM sleep, norepinephrine, when it's shut down, makes that you have no access to episodic memories, to your memories of events as they occurred. But it's the opposite for people who have PTSD nightmares. What do they dream about? They dream about exactly the events, exactly as they happen. And that's because of their neurochemistry, which is altered. And one of 2 treatments for PTSD-related nightmares, one of them is psychological or non-pharmacological. It's known as imagery rehearsal therapy, and we've done several studies on that. But another one is this medication, prazosin. And what prazosin does is that it reduces norepinephrine in the brain. And this is very effective in treating post-traumatic stress nightmares. And then once you do that, the system which is broken, even the dreaming system, is better able to process the trauma or contribute to process the trauma by having you present parts of the traumatic event, so the war scene or your buddy that died in the military or where you were when X happened, but without the overwhelming emotions or with other elements that make it a bit different. And this is the hyper-associative sort of bizarre elements of dreams that starts getting weaved in as your mind starts figuring out, how do I make sense of this? How does this fit in and how I understand myself, the world, my place within it? Where in my memory stores does this fit? And it starts being able to do that. And then people, also with therapy and many other things, are able to gradually heal. And having nightmares after trauma is one of the best predictors for suicidal ideation, even more so than depression. So the idea that nightmares are, many mental health professionals will say, we're not going to worry about your nightmares. Once we work out everything else will disappear on their own. No, A, they don't. And B, it's probably more effective to start working with the nightmares because there's very efficient treatments for them. And this allows people to sleep better, have more energy, and then use this energy to tackle these bigger issues in a therapeutic context.
One question here and one here, and then I'm going to invite people to come up and speak to, I saw you before, so go ahead.
Night terrors in young children seem to start at an approximate age and seem to pass on their own. What is happening there?
Okay, it's a very good question. So the genetics of sleep terrors is very similar to sleepwalking. Actually, many children have both. What happens there is that also it tends to happen out of slow wave sleep, this deep stage of sleep, usually again about an hour and a half after falling asleep. What exactly happens is unknown, but it's not fun. So there's usually not much of a recollection of dreamlike. It's more like an image, if there is anything. I was drowning. I was being buried alive, but I was being strangled, but there's no narrative, and something causes the body to go into a hyperactive arousal response. So the acceleration of heart rate, we had one woman in our sleep lab whose heart rate went from something like 61, 62 beats per minute to 170 in under 8-9 seconds, right? You can't do that. Even if someone was to pull out a gun at you, your heart rate's not going to accelerate as fast as in a sleep terror. So it's a sudden, massive discharge of autonomic activity, often if you've seen in children, accompanied by loud screams. They're unconsolable. They also tend to have no recollection of the event when they wake up. And it's very hard on the parents, because when you go pick up the child, they almost look through you. They have this glassy, they're unconsolable, and they don't seem to be registering much. And there too, there's very efficient things you can do. So parents can keep track of around how long after they've gone to sleep they have them. Okay, so usually it's an hour and a half. So you keep track of the sleep terrors for 2 to 3 weeks till you have good data on when I put them at this hour, it happens then. And you wake them up about 20, 30 minutes before that hour, before the time they usually have it. You have to really wake them up, not just, hey, wake them up, fully awake, engage. They might not be happy about it, and then you let them go back to sleep. And that is effective, and why we believe that it interrupts the accumulation of slow wave sleep, which goes awry. And you gotta think, we now realize that the brain is doing all kinds of very complicated things in its sleep, and it's in a state that's very different from wakefulness and very complicated, and a lot of things can go wrong. And in people who have sleep terrors, including adults, about 1% of adults continue to have sleep terrors. Again, this accumulation of delta activity, the slow wave activity that they have in deep sleep becomes overwhelming, or the brain can't deal with it. And for reasons that are not well understood, gives rise to this dramatic event with screaming and so on.
Okay, we've got one there, and then.
I just wondered, are there any implications for the two-way communication you were talking about with people who are in a coma? I mean, I realize that it's a different brain state, but.
No, I think Dr. Owen would be the one who was here, I think, via Zoom last week, and who will be in Montreal next Thursday. I'm meeting him there. Would be the one to ask. There's parallels, because in people, and coma, there's different forms of coma, right? So some people seem to be in a coma, but they are in the state known as locked-in syndrome, where they are consciously aware, but completely incapable of communicating or doing any movements with the outside world. But they're fully aware, and so one way of communicating with them is the tennis experiment. You tell them, we're going to ask you a question. If you know the answer, pretend you're watching a tennis game, your eyes, blah, blah. And then we know what areas of the brain get activated when you're observing and you see these patterns. So you ask them, were you born in Boston? They were, and you see the yes answer. So there's some parallels to be made, but it's two, but they're both kind of, one is older than the other in terms of discovery, but it's still insights into the mind, yeah.
You touched briefly on repetitive dreams, and I wonder if you could tell me why we have them and what does it mean? Because I have them all the time.
I can't and I can't. I would say that a very large proportion of them can be explained. So for instance, every night, somewhere, someone is dreaming of a plane crash or a volcano explosion or a tsunami, okay? Just because there's, whatever, 40 million Canadians now, someone's dreaming about that. And if tomorrow there's a tsunami or a plane crash, whatever, someone will go, oh my gosh, I dreamt about that yesterday. But if nothing happens, no one will. So I still get less than before. People write to me going, this event happened. So the volcano explosion in Iceland a few years ago, because I dreamt about that a week ago. So I go, good. So, and it goes, and I have many of those. So the next time you have one of those, email it to me. Email me your dream ahead of time, and then we'll see. So out of about, I don't know, 18, 20 people have written to me over the years, only 2 have ever written to me back because they weren't happy with my answer. I don't know what I'm supposed to tell them. And they should have dreamt about my answer, which is unsatisfying. And so, but they rarely do. So many can be explained. Others we can explain because there's little cues we have. So you see a friend of yours and maybe you don't consciously register that they look paler than before. Or go, oh, I had a good round of golf, but my shoulder's really hurting, which is, a sign of angina that you might have learned when you were in high school. And so, but your brain picks up on all of this. And then your brain might say, heart attack, and then you'll dream about that. And then they will. So those kinds of explanations. And then there's a thing where you're asking the wrong person. I have no idea. If you ask me, can I scientifically explain? No. What does it mean? Even less.
Thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Tony. Certainly enlightened all of us on what dreams are made of, the new science, and on the psychology of dreaming. I would like to remind everyone that Tony will be here again tomorrow at 10. We might be able to continue some of these thoughts, but it's on interpreting your own dreams, so maybe a little more personalized. Some of you won't be here tomorrow, so I want to remind you that the next and final event of the Brain and Mind series is a week today at the Culver Collegiate Institute with Dr. Norman Deutsch, and it's in the gym. Don't get mixed up with their annual drama festival. Dr. Deutsch will be speaking to us on his pioneering work in neuroplasty with the title, The Brain Can Change Itself. And this lecture is dedicated to Elizabeth Wilson, who was a founding member of the Northumberland Learning Connection, and she suffered a couple of brain injuries. So we'll have that one at the end, and I hope to see many of you tomorrow. Don't forget, books are on sale. Alex brought them if you're interested in some of Tony's books, and he'll autograph them for you. We also have a few of Adrian Owen's books here, The Gray Zone, and Norman Georges will be with us again next week. So thank you and good night.